Well, in Jesus' days, things are a little different than they are today. Um, you could be dirty and still be clean at a meal, or you could be clean and still be dirty at a meal. So, what did this mean? Well, the concept of cleanliness was not really associated with hygiene. Cleanliness is associated with ritual. It had to do with preparation for being involved in a particular ritual. And so the Jews would wash their hands in order to be pure, in order to do something that was radically sacred. And what that was a meal together. Because whenever they came together for a meal, what they were doing is they were symbolizing that they were the people of God, covenanted by God to be his special people. And their sharing of the meal was actually a communion meal in which they were representing the ancient people of Israel. And so this is what was going on. And some of the Pharisees and some of their people noticed that the disciples of Jesus were not washing their hands before being involved in this sacred act of a meal together. You see, when they were coming together, it was to be in communion with one another. And also, in the course of the meal, they were going to be using vessels and utensils that were going to be touching something that was sacred. And what was sacred was bread, wine, water. All these things were sacred because they were gifts from God. And so it was important to have prepared oneself in the right way according to the ritual in order to be ritually pure for that. And so Jesus' disciples were coming from up north. You know, they were considered the country bumpkin. Um, and so it seemed like they weren't exactly, coming from up there. They were not necessarily familiar with all of these sacred rituals that were surrounding Jerusalem and the temple at Jerusalem and the people that lived in Jerusalem. Um, just as a side note, many years ago, when I came down to Worcester to be involved in high school, I was coming from northern Maine, and so people down here would chide me or kid me that I was up from the Hicks. Well, we could say that the disciples of Jesus were from the Hicks, and they were down here in Jerusalem, and they didn't exactly know what the right manners were. And so the Pharisees were scandalized at them. And now Jesus called these Pharisees hypocrites. Well, first of all, it's not because what the Pharisees were insisting on was necessarily bad. They were insisting on something good. Now, why is it that Jesus nevertheless called them hypocrites? Well, hypocrite in the scriptures does not mean two-facedness as it has come to mean today. That word really means something else. And here's where I go as professor to instruct you in what the word hypocrite means. It comes from Greek. And in the Greek word, it means underestimated, underestimation. See, it comes from the word hypo, which means under, and krisis, which means a decision. And so, what Jesus was accusing the Pharisees of is that they were underestimating something that was really very important. What is it that they were underestimating? They were basically underestimating what it means to be a human being. They were so involved in their action and in the right thing to do that they were underestimating who they were as human beings. They were underestimating the fact that their very existence was God's gift to them. And so they were more concerned about doing than about being. And so that's why Jesus called them hypocrites. And so now Jesus was trying to introduce the world in a way to something new. His whole ministry was trying to define what it means to be a human being. And from that point of view, Jesus' disciples were not underestimating. They were being instructed as to what it means to estimate properly and what it means to think of themselves properly, to define themselves in terms of who they were as human beings. The Pharisees were so concerned about what they do, what the right thing of doing something, that they weren't paying attention to a much greater gift, God's gift to them. Very often, this is what we do all the time. You know, in our world today, we're so concerned about the right way of doing something that we lose the fact of who we are, and we define ourselves in terms of what we do. The Pharisees were defining themselves in terms of what they were doing religiously, and it's therefore they were underestimating who they were. So many students underestimate themselves. You come here in order to try to accumulate to what you need in order to have a good profession, to work out a profession, but that's what you do. But who are you? Who are you, the one who does the doing? And you are of greater value than what you do. And this is what the Pharisees lost track of. And so this is what we are invited to do, to pay attention to who we are. That's the good news that Jesus was bringing to the world. The good news of our lives, God-given lives. So we should not act in such a way that what we were doing in the past can get in the way of the future of what God wants to do. But we have to allow God to do it, and the only way in which God can do it is for us to be, first of all. So let's not be hypocrites, underestimating ourselves and everybody. And it's only once we estimate who we really are that we can also estimate who everybody else is. If we know ourselves as God's gift to us, then we can also recognize one another as God's gift to us. And what difference would that make in the world? A huge difference. It would change everything if human beings treated one another as God's gift to them. So let's not be Pharisees, blinded by what is best because we are attached to what has been good so far, or because we are attached to what we have done. Let's not underestimate the gift of ourselves, whom God has given us. Let's not let what we do tell us who we are, but instead let who we are dictate what we should do and what we should do for one another.